Hey, welcome to another episode of Auxano Lounge. I'm Ron Aiosa with Mr. Bill Boswell. We do our best to bring you guys interesting people, interesting stories of all diverse backgrounds, genres, things of that nature. Today, we have a very interesting guest. Before we even got started, Bill and I were both literally belly up, elbows up. I wish we were recording, but then again, this would be a 3-hour podcast at that point. So, we've got a gentleman who's got a great story, great history. For those who are local, Yankee fans, some people are sinners and they're Mets fans, but we won't go there.
It takes them all, right?
It does. It does. With us here is a 3-time World Series champ. Played about 11 years in the league.
11 years.
11 years in the league. Without any further ado, Mr. Jim Leyritz, thank you for being with us.
Gentlemen, thanks for having me.
100%. Jim is a professional athlete. You've probably seen a couple things, and I know a little bit about your history. I was looking up. You were quite the stud in Ohio in high school, and like this, you face a trial right away because the draft is about to hit. You're about to be one of the guys.
Yeah,
what happened?
Barry Larkin was supposed to be the first pick. I was supposed to be the second pick out of Cincinnati.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Why weren't you the second pick?
So I went out 4 days before, and this is a great story because you guys know my history with the Atlanta Braves. And you probably haven't heard this one yet, but 4 days before the draft, I went out and my buddy from high school wanted to play tennis, so we went out and played tennis. And I didn't tell my dad, and I went out and played tennis. And while I was playing tennis, my dad got a phone call from 2 scouts that said, "Hey, we're gonna draft your son. Does he want to go to college?" Because back then, that's kind of how they decided whether they were going to waste a pick on somebody. If the kid wanted to go to college, they weren't going to bother with it. So my dad said, "Well, I'll talk to him when he comes home. Just give me a call back tomorrow." So I end up fracturing the side of my foot. I was trying to do a smash, and my buddy drives me to the doctor. Doctor says, "Hey, you'll be fine. 2 weeks. It's just a small fracture. Don't worry about it. Just stay off it." So I get back. I get a little air cast put on it, and I go back, home, and I walk in the door. My dad's like, "What the hell did you do to yourself?" I said, "Not a big deal, Dad." I go, "Up 2 weeks. I'll be back playing again." He's like, "Oh, it's a big deal." I go, "What?" He goes, "I just got a call from 2 scouts that they're gonna sign you," and he said that they wanted to know if you were gonna sign for the draft. And now I got to tell him you got a broken leg. I go, "Well, don't tell him." He's like, No, I got to tell him.
Right.
And so sure enough, they call back the next day and they go, "Are you kidding?" And my dad said, "No, he broke his foot, but he'll be playing again in 3 or 4 weeks with the Midland team from Cincinnati. And, you guys can see him then." So sure enough, they came back 5 weeks later. They saw me play at a great tournament. And they said, "Yeah, we want to sign your son to my dad." And my dad said, "Okay, give him 10 grand. And it's
10 grand. Look
10
at
grand.
the difference. Pick to be a second round pick, or second overall pick.
Yeah.
And the signing bonus would have been 10 grand.
You'd make way more taking the college route these
Well,
days,
exactly.
right?
The NILs.
Yeah.
Crazy as that sounds.
Yeah, so they said we can only give him 5. So my dad said, "Screw that, he's going to college." So I went to junior college for 2 years, never got drafted. But I wasn't catching yet. I still was playing the outfield and third base because the foot wasn't 100%. Third year, I went to Kentucky, playing third base again. And I asked the coach, I said, "Can I at least catch a few games?" He goes, "No, my nephew's the starting catcher, so you can't catch." So I didn't catch at Kentucky. Well, then I didn't get drafted again. I was really pissed off. And my buddy lived in Hayes, Kansas. And he said, "Jimmy, the Jayhawk League is out there. Let's go play out there, and maybe we'll get noticed out there." So we went out and played, and I told the coach when I got out there, I want to catch a little bit. So I started catching. Well, after catching a weekend series, a Yankee scout came up to me and said, "Hey, what are you doing catching?" I said, "Well, I can catch." And he said, "Well, not according to your draft report." He said, "It says Leyritz still can't catch. I just saw you catch 3 games. We want to sign you." And I'm like, "Okay." So I called my dad up and said, we were in Wichita. I said, "Dad, can you get a flight to Wichita ASAP? We're going to sign with the Yankees tomorrow." Then all of a sudden, the Kansas City Royals came and said, "Okay, we want to sign you too." And so now we had 2 teams we were talking to. We got them both up to 8,000. And then the only reason is because I called my mom and said, "Mom, I think we have 2 teams to pick from, and they're both giving us $8,000. And she's like, "Well, if you got to see if any of them will give you your education. If you don't make it, that they'll pay for your senior year. See if you can get that."
Smart mom.
Yeah. So we went to both teams, and sure enough, the Kansas City Royals said no, and the Yankees said yes. And then my dad pulled me aside and he goes, okay, here's the situation. You're going to have to go with the Yankees because your mom's going to be pissed if you don't. And so second of all, the Royals just won the World Series in '85, and they were a hot team. And the Yankees stink.
Oh, boy.
You got a better chance of getting through the system quicker with the Yankees. So we signed with the New York Yankees.
What year was that, Jim?
This is 1985.
85.
So
If he could only seen the future, huh?
So the irony of the story is, fast forward to 1996, Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, I hit the big home run.
Yes.
Those two scouts were sitting in John Schuerholz's box. The Atlanta
stop
Braves.
it.
They were Brave scouts.
Oh, wow.
And they said they tell a story at one of the camps that they looked at each other and said, "Do not tell John Schuerholz for $5,000. We could have changed this entire thing. It would have never happened because I would have never been a Yankee."
Listen, that's okay. They already had their run.
Well, exactly,
right?
exactly.
Come on.
Well, and that's funny because when I told that story to Smoltz and Glavin, because we play golf together once in a while, they're like, "Are you kidding? We could have changed that entire situation by just for $5,000." Yeah, I'm like, "Yep, they could have."
It's crazy, man.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you play golf with Smoltz and Glavin?
And Maddox, yeah.
There's definitely, not to get too far off topic, but there is a ridiculous statistic, and I don't know if it's on Smoltz or Glavin.
No, it's Smoltz.
And
It's
there's
Pedro, Maddox, and Smoltz.
Maddox. It was Maddox, right?
Yeah, Pedro, Maddox, and Smoltz.
Like how many
Tony
times?
Gwynn.
How many times they went deep in like a 3-2 count
They
in
had-
their career?
Oh, that's a different one. I
That's
thought you were
the one
talking about
I'm
the Tony
thinking
Gwynn.
of. Go ahead, you go.
So the Tony Gwynn one was those three guys combined only struck out Tony Gwynn twice,
Oh my goodness.
and so many, so many at bats. And Tony hit I think off Maddox, I think he hit like 430 lifetime. I mean, it was crazy. But yeah, but they also the other thing you're thinking about was the 3-2 count.
Yes.
That he went so many innings without ever going to a 3-2
in his
count.
whole career.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah.
like, it's ridiculous
Yeah,
when
it's
you
crazy.
look in it. Just to think about that 3-2, right? So you're telling me you never got the ball 3?
Right.
Not never, right? But it's the
Right.
amount of times.
Right.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your home run. Wallers?
Mark Wohlers.
Mark
yeah.
Wallers.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I have a question, and then we'll definitely get a little bit deeper. You had one of the strangest batting stances.
But that was the broken leg. So when
this is what I've been dying to ask.
So when I broke my foot, and the scouts came to my dad and said, "Okay, we'll come back and watch him play in 4 weeks," I said to my dad, I want to be ready as soon as I'm healthy." And so I said, "Can you get the doctor to put a cast on my foot?" It was my left leg.
Mm-hmm.
And I started taking batting practice, but I couldn't put any weight on it. So I just hit with the stiff front leg when I was taking. And all of a sudden, because I used to hit like Pete Rose, I used to get in a little crouch and just hit line drives.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, being back on my back leg, I started crushing the ball, hitting bombs. And so that's how that swing developed, was from a broken leg.
No way.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
But all right, so help me out then. So that must have been a pretty light leg lift, because you had a leg lift in it.
Oh, yeah.
But you didn't come down heavy.
No.
You kept all your weight on
And
the
that
back.
was part of that because of that.
So
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm so happy I'm being here. I'm going to be 50 this year, and I've been a
Okay.
Yankee fan for way too long.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to know how, who, and why created that.
Well, and then
stance.
the bat spin that I did after every pitch
Yep.
was from when I used to watch Mickey Rivers.
Okay.
Because Mickey had a little spin, and so we were doing it one day in junior college, and we all do bat tricks in junior college, and all of a sudden one day we were beating this team like 20-2, and they're like, "Dude, let's do our bat trick as we go up to the plate," and so mine was the spin, but I didn't know when to do it. I'm like, you know what? I'll do it after the pitch. So I took a pitch, I spun the bat. The next pitch, I hit a home run. Next time up, did it again. Another home run. I had never hit 2 home runs in a game before. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to spin this freaking bat every single time. And that's where it started. It started in
Baseball
junior.
superstition,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, it's funny how those little things stick too. I was on the phone with a good friend of mine last night, Travis, and I was telling him that we were going to be sitting down today, and that's the first thing he said. He's like, "The bat spin." Right?
You always notice all the little different things with each player. Who's
Yeah.
got what? It's so awesome.
Where was your mindset in that? For me, I love to pull these things out, especially elite athletes. The way that they approach challenges in many cases gives us such a foundation to apply to other parts of life.
Yeah.
Right. So when that happened, and you're young, right? When that happened, with your foot, and you kind of get kicked into the more college style as opposed to going straight to pro. Where were you at mentally there? It was that a frustration point? Was that a, hey, I'm going to make it anyway? Like what? Was it fuel? Was it a setback?
Yeah, I always tell my father was a cross between Woody Hayes and Bobby Knight.
Oof.
So, yeah,
Ouch.
you can imagine. 2 for 4, why didn't you go 3 for 4? 20 points in a basketball game, why didn't you score 30? Never be satisfied. You have a goal to reach. When you reach one goal, you set another. And that was his whole thing. He never, ever once was satisfied with anything that I was doing. He was kind of like a coach, more of a coach than a father to me. The mindset was always, what's next? When I got called up to the big leagues, I walk into Yankee Stadium for the first time, and I'm taking it all in, and I'm standing on the mound. I see Monument Park. I go into the locker room, and I'm right next to Don Mattingly, right? That's my lot. And all of a sudden, I'm like, dude, I made this thing. So I get on the phone. I call my dad up, and I said, Dad, you're not going to believe this. I said, I just got walked into Yankee Stadium. I took the subway. It was unbelievable, the experience. I said, and my locker's next to Don Mattingly. I've made it. And he goes, son, that's great. He said, what are you going to do to stay there?
Oh, I love it. Oh, wow.
Hung up the phone, went back to my locker, sat down. Within 5 minutes, Don Mattingly comes walking in and sits down. And he goes, hey, kid. I got called up in Baltimore. I played 3 games in Baltimore. He goes, hey, pretty good start so far, because I got to hit my first time up. And he goes, pretty good start so far. He said, but let me just tell you this. If you don't ask questions, you won't last long. And that's why you're right here next to me. That to me was one of the greatest, probably, like I said, everybody always asks me, who's your favorite teammate? I said, Don Mattingly. 100%.
I was going to ask you.
100%. There's nobody else that changed my career and helped me in the very beginning than Don Mattingly. And to watch him, I'm off topic, I know, but I was blessed to be able to play with the 3 greatest hitters of that decade, 3 of the greatest hitters of that decade. I mean, Edgar Martinez is also one, but I never played with him. But Tony Gwynn, Wade Boggs, and Don Mattingly. And they're all 3 different great hitters in different ways. But Donnie was the kind of guy, and I just remember literally a month into my first being in the big leagues, Donnie had a game. He actually went 3 for 5, but he got a bunch of swinging bunts, and he was not happy with the way he was seeing the ball. And I used to walk across the field to get to the subway, to take the subway home every night. So I was walking across the field, and there were in the old stadium, the batting cages were in right field, and all I heard was this banging on the tarp that was behind home plate. And I'm like, who in the hell is in the batting cages at this time of night? And I walk over and I look over, and it's Don Mattingly. He doesn't even have a bat in his hand. He's just watching pitches and timing. And I'm like, you know what? That's amazing. I mean, and that was just the kind of thing that you learn as a player. Like, you know what? You got to work to stay here. And the gist of the question was
it's crazy too, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's a culture thing, right?
Yeah.
And I always say this all the time, and I feel like the Yankees, they've had this culture of winning for a long time.
George Steinbrenner.
Right.
I mean, if you just watch that Peacock series, the early '90s, it was on Peacock. It was called The Bronx is Burning.
Yeah.
And it was the beginning in 1990 when I first got caught up, and all the stuff that was happening with George and the suspensions and everything else. And I mean, honestly, that was my learning experience of coming to the big leagues. Not only was it just crazy that I was playing in New York for the Yankees, but we were going through a lot of turmoil and a lot of craziness, and living in New York City in the early 90s. When my agent told me to live in the city and take the 4 train, I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, it was a different city.
Well, if you remember, I used to wear a cowboy hat and cowboy boots everywhere. So I was a country kid. And my parents are from Ohio. They're like, you're taking the 4 train? Aren't you afraid you're going to get shot or something? I go, Mom and Dad, I got a cowboy hat, cowboy boots. They think I'm the crazy one. So I'm okay. But it was just really interesting. But like you were saying, what I learned over the years and what I now use in my business side where I do title insurance is being able to perform, be prepared under those situations for just about anything. And that's kind of what New York taught me. It's kind of what living in the city taught me. Kind of taking the 4 train taught me was you always had to be aware of your surroundings. You always had to be ready to pivot, to move. Being a catcher, I tell people all the time, I give a lot of corporate speaking to sales teams and to managers and say, I was in charge of a team. I was in charge of 10 guys. I was in charge of, every pitch, and the one thing about what people don't understand is as a catcher, your mindset changes after every pitch. And there's over 270 to 300 pitches per game. And you think about that how much you have to figure out and be prepared before you go in to be able to pivot. And it really makes a difference. You guys know baseball. A ball versus a strike, a different pitch gets called. If it's ball one, maybe you throw another fastball. If you strike one, maybe you go with a breaking ball. It changes every single. And they always say that they give you these reports about the other hitter, and this is what his strengths are and his weaknesses. And it's like, wait a minute, still got a pitcher out there that I got to go by his strengths and weaknesses, and we got to figure this out. And that really is where the game of baseball taught me so much in the game of life, is that to be able to pivot, to be able to learn how to get prepared. Even my trial that I went through for 3 years, I was basically my attorney's assistant, because I was so prepared, because it took 3 years to get there. I was so prepared for it. But most of it was because of what I learned as a ball player, what I learned about playing in New York. Ignore what the media was saying, ignore what, that, just go out there and do your job and fight for the truth, fight for what you believe in. And honestly, it really helped me. The one biggest adjustment, though, guys, I'll tell you that I have had to make, not being the athlete anymore and being in the business, is that I had to learn to become more interested than interesting. Because when I was the ball player, people wanted to know about me. People wanted to know this. All right? I am in the business world now. And when I'm selling title insurance, or I'm doing the IT work that I do with a spokesperson for another IT company, at the end of the day, it's great. I get a lot of appointments because if people want to talk to Jim Leyritz, the Yankee.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if I don't have a good product, or if I don't have a good title team
Service
behind me, I always tell people I'm still the catcher. I coordinate, I call the game, but my team has to execute. Right. And that's where I won't put my name behind the company unless I know that company can do what they're supposed to do. And but I learned all that from being a New York Yankee and playing in New York, and just learning my surroundings. I mean, it was a pretty amazing opportunity.
It's incredible. And you say, Steinbrenner had a lot to do with that culture. So I guess I could say this because I have, through a lifetime, enjoyed watching the Mets too. But this is probably the same time the Mets were like doing haircuts in the bullpen, right? You guys are at this elite level, and it really starts at the top. So could you maybe take a minute or two, go a little deeper on what you felt like his impact was on that franchise to promote that excellence, and how we can maybe apply that to some of the areas of our business and life?
Yeah, I mean, George was the kind of guy that said, listen, I'll pay you the most, but I expect the most. And no excuses. If he would say, Joe Torre, what do you need? Okay, I'm going to go get Cecil Fielder. And when he comes here, if you don't win, it's your fault, because you told me you needed Cecil Fielder. It's one of those things, like you mentioned, be prepared what you ask for, but you better execute. And one thing I loved about George is, George was the kind of guy that said, hey, Leyritz, are you in the lineup today? I said, no, Mr. Steinbrenner, I'm not in the lineup today. This will be right before I'm getting ready to take batting practice. And he goes, all right, skip batting practice. Go down to right field and start signing those autographs for all those kids and for the fans, because they're the ones that take care of you. Wow. I mean, that's how George was.
Oh,
and he taught us so much. He taught me so much about what it is to give back. He had a little sign on his desk that used to say, if you do something for somebody that more than one person has to know about it, you did it for the wrong reasons. And that always stuck with me. And then, of course, the opportunity, and I could tell the story with my Johnny Bench story. And that's why when people come up to me, and I take the time, because Johnny Bench changed my life forever when I was a kid. He gave me his catcher's mitt during a TV show that we were doing together. And I wasn't a catcher at the time. I wanted to be Pete Rose. And I wore number 14 and everything else. And we did this segment together, and he said, hey, son, are you a catcher? I said, no, Mr. Bench. I said, I want to be like Pete. And he's like, well, when I was your age, my dad said catching's the quickest way to the big leagues. And it turned out pretty good for me, because you got some pretty mad skills as a catcher, even though you're not a catcher. He said, you should think about it. And I think he kind of could tell. I was 14 years old. I think he could tell that I wasn't buying into it. And he said, well, maybe this will help you. He took his catcher's mitt off. He signed it, and he handed it to me. I went home that night and said, Dad, I'm going to become a catcher.
Oh man.
So that was that was beginning of high school. And so as you just heard the story about breaking my foot and I couldn't catch. So when I went back to catching, I finally get signed. So I have the great career. 2006, we're in the Hall of Fame game and I'm sitting here and I'm in the same locker room as Johnny Bench. And I walk up to him and I said, "Hey, Johnny, I never got an opportunity to thank you for my career." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And I tell him the story about how I wasn't a catcher, that became a catcher, and because of him, I became a catcher. And I tell him the whole story. He's like, "Are you kidding? You were that kid?" I'm like, "Yeah." Yeah, and it made his day. He's like, "Can I tell that story?" I'm like, "Yeah, you changed my life forever." And so I always tell guys that I do work with and still do some appearances with. I go, "Guys, take the time, because you might say 2 words to a kid and change his life forever." It's incredible, So, but back to what you were saying, the pressures of playing for somebody like George Steinbrenner were also pretty hard. It was one of those things. He paid the best, but he expected the best, and if you didn't perform, he was going to call you out. But I had already lived that with my dad pretty much my entire life. So George was like a second dad to me. One of the things he loved about me was my chip on my shoulder, that I was like, hey, here I am, a young rookie kid going, hey, either play me or trade me. And he respected that. He was like, you know what, if you get the chance, you better go out and perform then. And I did in the beginning stages.
What year did you get drafted?
So I got signed. I didn't get drafted. I signed as a free agent out of the Jayhawk League in Kansas in 1980, at the end of 1985.
And then how many years did you spend in the
86 to 90 in the minor leagues?
Okay.
And then I got called up in June of 1990.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story. You got to get my book. My book is called Catching Heat.
Catching Heat?
Yep. You go to the website, jimleyritz.com, and you can order it. It's all about never being drafted, making it into the big leagues, having the big moments in New York, but then giving up the game of baseball to come home and be the best teammate of all, and that was Dad. And that's a whole nother story. But when I left the game in 2003 because my ex-wife was having drug issues, I took custody of the kids, and I got $1 million contract for the San Diego Padres to come back and play. And the judge in Florida said, if you go back to play, you'll lose your kids. And I quit. And that was it. Wow. Yeah. So that was the beginning. And so I had written the book, and then I had the accident. The book got kind of put on hold. During the 3 months of waiting, or 3 years of waiting for trial, I was speaking at a church about the dangers of drinking and driving, and all my life. And this woman heard me speaking, and she goes, you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, well, I got 108 pages written already that I wrote for HarperCollins, but they didn't take it. And she said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write 3 more chapters, and I want you to write about what you've been through these 3 years, what the state of Florida put you through, and all these false charges and everything else that they're doing to you. I want you to write that. And so the final 3 chapters are all about what I went through until the end of the trial. Dude. And we ended up changing the name to Catching Heat. Which
Great
is
name.
Yeah,
catchy.
I was a catcher, and I caught a lot of heat in the courtroom, so it was a pretty good catch. So, but playing for George, playing under that pressure, playing in New York was crazy. Right. I never knew anything about the New York Yankees. I grew up in Cincinnati with the Big Red Machine. That was my teams. All I remember, I said to George, because George asked me one day, he said, "What do you know about the Yankees?" I go, "You got swept by my Reds in 1976."
Said that to George.
Yeah, and so. That was about it. And so in 1988, Dave Island, who was a pitcher for the Yankees, for your Mets too, pitching coach for your Mets too. Dave and I were teammates up in Albany, playing for Albany Colony Yankees. And one day we had an off day, and I said,
"Is that single, double, or triple?"
Double A. Double A. So I said, Dave's like, "Hey, let's go to Yankee Stadium. They're playing at home, and we have a day off." So we're like, "Yeah, sure, we'll go." So we come down. Now this is 1988. This is when Don Mattingly was in his heyday. I mean, he was the big thing. So we come down, we're sitting behind home plate. First time ever in New York in the Yankee Stadium. And, first of all, driving through the Bronx was kind of unusual back then too, as a kid from Cincinnati. So we pull in, we get to there, we got seats right behind home plate. And all of a sudden, what was the announcer's name? Bob Shepard.
Yeah, Shepard.
Bob Shepard says, "Now batting number 23, Don Mattingly, number 23. And all of a sudden the crowd goes nuts, and there's, MVP, cap. And they're all screaming and yelling. And sure enough, first time up, Donnie hits a base hit in the right field, and everybody's going crazy. And Dave looks at me and goes, "Dude, this is awesome. I can't wait to play here." He goes, "This is going to be great." And then all of a sudden, 3 innings later, Donnie comes over the men on second and third. They're losing 3-1, and he pops up to second base. And all of a sudden, it's like, Mattingly, you suck. You're the worst. You're so bad. You're that. And Dave Island looked at me and goes, dude, we can't play here. If they're doing that to Don Mattingly, we got no chance here.
Oh, yeah.
That was our initiation into learning what it was going to be like to play in New York. And if you didn't have the cojones, you were not going to make it.
Did you see the game the other night when Grisham?
Yeah.
Grisham was up the bat and the whole stadium. I'm at the game. The whole stadium is chanting, "We want Soto. We want Soto." 2 pitches later, Grisham hits a 3-run shot. He flips the bat. I'll give you your Soto. No, don't get me wrong, Soto. But that's the fans.
Yeah.
It's amazing, man.
Yeah.
Hey, you said something before I would love to circle back to, man. You were talking about, catching and how the game of baseball, it's every single pitch. Yeah. And there's so many people out there who, if they don't understand the game, will always say it's so boring. And I'm on the other side. I'm like, it is the polar opposite of boring because it's so strategic, and it's not just the game of baseball, it's the thought process. So long story short, my son's a senior in high school. He just finished up, made it to their second round of state playoffs, whatever. They were terrible in the beginning of the season. And I actually asked the coach, I go, Coach, you could say no. Would you mind if I talk to the team? I go, sometimes when they hear from the same person, it's going nowhere. He says, absolutely. He lets me, right? So I talk to the kids, whole season turns around. These kids, they start killing it, and they make it. And they're not the most incredible talented bunch, let me tell you, but it was there. And so I'd always tell the kids the same thing, and this is why it triggered me. I said, what do you guys play? And they're like, baseball. I said, wrong, you play chess. I go, you got to start thinking 2, 3, 4, 5 moves in advance, as you just said with the pitches. So just something that struck me about that, number one. Number two, 3, in your opinion, best players, best hitters that you played with were Mattingly, Gwynn, and Boggs. What strikes me about that comment is none of them were a home run king. Right? But they were just great hitters. Most people don't look at them that way, right? Most people today will say, well, it's Aaron Judge is the best hitter, and then it's the Mark McGuires and the Barry Bonds and the Sosas and all that. So tell me what it was about those guys that you claim were the best hitters. What did you see?
Well, again, 14, 15 years old with spring training with the Reds, I learned from Pete Rose. Pete was I was picking the balls up one day. I was 14 years old. I was picking the balls up where Pete was hitting in the cages. And, Tommy and I used to kind of hang out and watch. And Pete would say, okay, I'm going to hit 150 balls off the Iron Mike machine. He said, I'm going to hit 50 to left, 50 to center, and 50 to right. He goes, I want you guys to count how many times the ball hits the ground or hits the top. That doesn't count. And if I don't hit 40 out of 50 line drives each way, I'll take you guys to lunch. And we did this for 2.5 straight years in spring training. So you're talking 60 times at least in the 2-year period. Twice he took us to lunch. This guy had so much discipline to just hit line drives, base hits. That's why he's got the most base hits ever in baseball. Right. I mean, but also, I learned that from him, but then also taking batting practice with Wade Boggs. Wade Boggs could hit the ball further than Mark McGwire if he wanted to. He had more power than Mark McGwire ever even could think about having. And I know you
really?
Yeah, you raised your eyes.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And I didn't know that. All I knew was, okay, but he's like, Jimmy, I played in Boston. I just hit the ball off that wall. I just tattooed that wall. That's all I had to do. And he goes, I've learned to just hit line drives. I want to hit 340. I don't want to hit 290 with 35 jacks.
Right.
Yeah. And that was his hitting approach. But I was even more impressed with it because I'm like, dude, I had that kind of power. I'd be just swinging from my hips every single time. But this guy's got the discipline to hit the ball over. Now, Tony Gwynn was another different type of hitter. He was the best bad ball hitter. That's why they talk about the 5-6 hole. That was his hole because it would be a pitch that was 2 feet off the plate. And he would just hit a little ground ball, line drive right through that little hole every single time and hit 370, 390. And so it was just, and then Don Mattingly was the other one that had a little bit of power. He always hit 20, 30 home runs, but also could hit for average. And that was kind of rare back then too. But Donnie's work ethic was second to none. And
so discipline and work ethic, that's what you see in these guys, exactly. Yeah?
And preparation. And that's what we talk about with the business. And when we translate that over to business,
right.
It's all about being prepared. And, when I went through my trial, I had to be prepared. I had all these questions written for my attorney. And he was like, what are you doing? I'm like, dude, this is my life, And it was like, okay, if the state attorney does this, you do this. If the state attorney does that, you do this. It was all about, and I learned that from my baseball career of, okay, if Andy Pettitte throws a ball, I got to throw this pitch. If he throws a strike, I got to throw this pitch. And I had to be able to think at the drop of a hat. Like, what's the next pitch? What's the next thing? How do we do this? The other thing that I had to do as a catcher is I had to learn how to deal with different personalities. I had 10 pitchers. They weren't all the same. I go out to the mound to talk to David Cohn, and you see those movies with Boardroom and that stuff, and that's how I had to speak to David Cohn. I'd be like, "Hey, Coney, the blonde over there, she says she wants to meet you after the game. Let's get this thing over with." Now, and then Coney would totally just get back into the groove because I took him away from him being so frustrated. But then Andy Pettit, if I walked out to the mound to Andy Pettit, I'd have to go, "Hey, dude, mechanics, get your hand over." It was more about his mechanics than it was, or his mindset, than it was just trying to break the monotony, because he wouldn't want me to make a joke. But David Cohn, I would have to make a joke to. But then, so those were my starting pitchers, and then all of a sudden I had to make an adjustment every time a new pitcher came in from the bullpen of how do I get the most out of this guy, And I just tell the story all the time in my public speaking is Andy Pettit I was his personal catcher for 95 and 96. There were times that I was warming up Andy Pettit that he couldn't get me out.
What do you mean personal catcher? You mean in the games?
I caught every game. I caught every game of Andy Pettit from 95 and 96.
And Posada was still there?
Nope, Girardi was the other coach.
Okay.
I mean, the other catcher. In 95, Mike Stanley was the catcher, the other one. And Andy didn't like throwing to him because Mike couldn't really catch his cutter very well, and I could. So I ended up catching Andy the last 12 starts, and we went 9-3 together at the end of 95. When 96, Joe Torre came in, Andy went and met with Joe and said, "Can you just please keep Jimmy as my catcher?" And Joe said, "Yes, and I'll catch him every single time I can, but if there's a tough left-hander like a Randy Johnson, Joe's going to be in the lineup." And I'm not putting Joe at DH. I'll put Jimmy at DH.
Got it.
So there was maybe 8 or 9 games that year that I didn't catch in 96, but Andy went I think it was 21-9 or 21-7, and was second to Cy Young. But the thing about Andy was there were times I warmed him up that he didn't have crap in the bullpen. I'd walk with Mel Stoudemire, and Mel said, "What'd you think?" I go, "Yeah, I hope we can get through 3 today." But
wow.
I never let Andy know that. And my job was to get the most out of him that I could possibly get that day. And Andy never shook. That was the one thing about Andy. He never shook a pitch. He had so much confidence in all 4 pitches that no matter what, he trusted me because I was a hitter first, catcher second. So he knew I was thinking.
He never shook you off?
Never.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was amazing because we were playing a game in Kansas City or against Kansas City at home one time, and he walked like 6 guys in the first 2 innings. And I'm sitting next to Mel Stoudemire, and all of a sudden he comes walking down the bench and he hits my leg and he goes, "Quit walking, people." And I was like, and I looked at Mel and I go, "Did he just say that?" And Mel's like, "Yeah, dude, you're way too deep in that kid's head." but that was our relationship, and that was kind of what, like I said, it was something that just worked, and it shouldn't have worked because we were both totally different personalities. I was the guy that was always out in New York City at the Ranger games, I was always somewhere, where Andy was the good Christian kid and going home reading his Bible every night and doing, but when we got between the lines, it clicked. And for me, it was a tremendous 2 years with him.
That's incredible. I think it's in the short time we spent together, there's so many points in not just your career, but I think your life where resilience was kind of that overriding factor. So I think, and God bless the people who aren't dealing with the need for that in their lives right now. But I think over the course of one's life, inevitably, anybody listening to this, if they're not a sports fan, if they're in business, if they're not in business, will face some times where resilience is necessary. And our ability to bounce back or to buckle down in those moments become, paramount in how we come out of the other end. So, you talked about the ankle injury and then the draft and then, coming on the scene in New York, and then your trial. But how long?
3 years.
And then, if that didn't turn out the way that it did, what would have happened? The trial.
I was facing 15 years.
15 years. So talk about resilience in that moment, and having a choice to hang up the cleats or be dad, right? What would you say is the most important factor in those moments at the plate? To hit, a massive home run that could, arguably start a dynasty, right? Like, What do you feel or say that you can convey to the people listening that may need that resilience right now, or inevitably at one point in their life they're going to need it? How do you talk to them?
Yeah, I mean, I always talk to people because I kind of feel like I've lived two lives. I was an athlete, and everything was about me. Everything that, people were interested in what I was doing, like I was mentioned before, interested versus interesting. That was kind of the way my whole life was until I had kids. And then, of course, to make that decision to leave the game of baseball. But when I read a book called The Purpose-Driven Life by this pastor named Rick Warren, my whole life changed on the first 4 words of that book. And the first 4 words of that book, it's not about you. And for someone who life was all about me, my mom and dad, my brother, my sister all made sacrifices so I could get to the, play baseball. Our summer vacations our spring vacations, spring breaks were not going to the beach. It was going to the baseball games and spring training in Fort Lauderdale, in Tampa. I mean, it was all about me. And then for that mindset to change after I read that book, my life is so much richer now. And I don't mean monetarily, but just rich. And the resiliency that you're talking about is the faith that I had. My mom and dad put my faith in me. They made me go to church on Sunday. They made me go to Bible class on Wednesday nights. They said, this is your grounding. And if, I got away with it. I got away from it for a while during my big league career. Of course, I get caught up in being, the king of New York and, all the other stuff. And, my mother and father went probably about 1.5, 2 years without talking to me because they didn't like the lifestyle that my ex-wife and I were leading.
Wow.
And it was very difficult. And finally, I always say that, the accident is one of the worst things that ever happened to me, but also one of the best things. The worst thing was that the woman passed away. But the best thing that ever happened to me was the humbleness that I was able to get from that. But like you're talking about, being able to deal with that, it was a mindset that I had as a kid. I remember Andy Stankiewicz was one of my former teammates. And when Joe Torre wrote his book in 1996 about the 96 team, they asked Andy, what was it like, because Andy and I and Bernie Williams, we all played through the minor leagues all the way up from single A all the way up to the big leagues. And we were teammates for 5 years or 4 years. And they asked Andy, what was the difference between Bernie and Jimmy? He said, well, Bernie was kind of quiet. Jimmy was always kind of loud. He said, but Bernie was always, playing his guitar and different things. He said, but the one thing about Jimmy, he said, all he talked about in single A when we were first starting was what he was going to do in the big leagues. We were just trying to figure out how to survive A ball when this guy's already talking about what he's going to do. And because that was his mindset. And that's why he made it like he did. Because that's what my dad taught me. My dad said, "This is your goal to reach, and you don't be happy till you get there." I led the league in hitting 2 years in the minor leagues. I didn't care. I'm like, when am I getting pulled? When I get pulled up to the next level? When am I going to get that opportunity to get to the big leagues? And then when I got to the big leagues, within the second year of starting, they sat me for like 3 straight weeks because they were trying to trade Bob Guerin and Matt Noakes, and I didn't know that's what they were trying to do because they wouldn't tell me. And so I was getting pissed off, and I actually said it in the paper to Joel Sherman. I said, I was like 4 for 44, and I said, play me or trade me. And they're like, you got a lot of nuts being 4 for 44 and saying play me or trade me. It's like, who is this kid? And sure enough, they sent me down to AAA as a kind of a punishment. And I went down there and I, hit 290, hit 13 home runs, and I was ready to come back. And all of a sudden in September, they call me back up, and it's like Mel Hall and those guys that were my teammates. If you saw their Bronx's Bernie again, they were like, dude, what are you doing here? How are you getting called back up? We thought for sure you were out of here because just the way you were. And sure enough, I hit like 300 the last month of September. The next year, I was back with the Yankees. And of course, by 96, I was the most tenured Yankee on that team because Don Mattingly had just retired. And so my 6 years were the most of anybody on that team. And it was really kind of a learning experience from 1990 to 96 of how we were such failures in the early 90s. And all of a sudden things started to change when Buck Showalter came, and then when Buck left, Joe Torre, and just the differences of how how we developed. And all of the lessons, like I said, all the lessons that I learned that, when you pick a game of baseball to play, you're picking a game that you're going to fail.
That's it.
7 out of 10 times. And probably, I hit 264 lifetime.
Yeah.
I failed, 6.5 out of 10.
7.5, almost 8.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you had to learn to deal with failure. And I think that's really, honestly, what's really helped me with the transition of, when I had the accident, all of a sudden I wasn't Jim Leyritz, the superstar, the king of New York. I was back down to, okay, who's this? What's the truth with this? Is this guy, responsible for all this? And it took me, what are we in, 2024? It's taken me this long to be able to finally get my name back, because everybody didn't know what happened. They didn't know all the false allegations that my ex-wife brought up as far as domestic violence, where she almost went to jail for false charges, where the state attorney didn't become a judge because she brought me in and she abused her powers during my trial. All these different things, but what it did is it taught, like you were talking about, it taught me resiliency. It's like I knew what the truth was, and I was going to fight for the truth, whether it was I did the same thing with my baseball career. I wanted to be an everyday player, and so I was going to fight to try to be an everyday player, whatever manager I had, whatever coach I had, and it rubbed some of them the wrong way. But I just remember Joe Torre going, he's a pain in my ass, but if I need somebody in the 9th inning, and I need somebody to get a hit, I'm calling on him. And one of the things that we talk about preparation in baseball, preparation in our whatever we do in business. It's the most important thing. And I used to tell my son, who played minor league ball, because he didn't start all the time either. And I said, you know what, Austin, when I was playing, that 2nd inning, I put my batting gloves on. I had a bat in my hand, and I would walk by the coach every inning as I was going up to take swings in the cage and go, Coach, I'm going to be swinging in the cage. If you need me, I'm ready.
I love it.
Squeaky wheel, right?
Exactly. Grady Little, remember Grady Little, the manager of the Boston Red Sox that left Pedro in too long? He was my bench coach when I was a Red Sox. And I used to just joke with him all the time because they wouldn't let me catch over there because Joe Kerrigan was the pitching coach, and that's why I left Boston. But I would walk by Grady, and he was the bench coach of Jimmy Williams, and I would walk by Grady and I go, hey, we're playing Seattle. You know who the closer is, right? And he goes, Mike Jackson. I said, Michael Jackson. Yeah. I go, just call my name if you need me. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And so that's what I would try to teach my son the same thing. Like, hey, put your batting gloves on. Buck Showalter told him one time in a batting cage when he played with the Orioles, when Buck was with the Orioles, and we were at the batting cage and Buck was talking to him, and my son said, well, what was it like coaching my dad? And he said the same thing. He's a pain in the ass. He said, but Austin, he said, the difference between your dad and everybody else that was on the bench is that when I would look down in the 6th or 7th inning, all the other guys would be pissed off because they're not in the start lineup, and they'd have their jackets on and they'd be sitting there moping around. He said, your dad, he was swinging a bat every inning. He was ready, and if I called on somebody, that's who I called on. And he said, that was one thing that your dad had that most players didn't. And it was what my father taught me. Always be ready. You can talk a good game. From 1990 to 93, the New York media just killed me. This cocky kid he thinks he should play every day. He says he could hit 30 home runs and drive in 100 RBIs and and they all saw, his bat or his bravado is bigger than his bat.
Yeah.
That was the headlines. And then all of a sudden, 93, Don Mattingly gets hurt, and I play for 7 straight weeks, and I've got 9 home runs and 30 RBIs in the first 2 months of the season, and people are like, he's leading the league in home runs, or the team in home runs, he's leading the team in RBIs, and he's not even there. He's not the everyday guy. And then sure enough, so the numbers I put up in 93 and 94 were I hit 309 in 93 with 14 home runs and 53 RBIs and only 250 at bats. In 1994, strike year, when the strike happened, I had 270 at bats with 17 home runs and 59 RBIs. So if you combine those 2 years together, which is a total of 500 at bats, which is a normal season for an everyday player, I had 31 home runs and 110 RBIs.
Everything you told me.
There's those numbers. All of a sudden, when 94 ended, it was like Leyritz is finally backing up the bravado with his bat. It changed the narrative of the way the media, came after me.
Well, just hearing you interpret those things, I feel like, and different people, and I think this is more of a choice than some people think, but that type of pressure created a bigger fire in you, right?
Yeah.
Like to prove them wrong, to do that. And that's the same thing with the trial when you said that turned around. Like this puts you back where you're going to prepare more. You knew those questions inside and out, right?
Well, during the trial stuff, I had 3 kids I was fighting for. Again, it was, and I was faced with the decision 3 months before the trial. They threw out all the evidence of the other driver being drunk, the other driver running through the red light, no seatbelt, text messaging while the accident was occurring, all these different things that had happened. They threw all that out because the crux of the case was who went through the red light, and the state had to prove that I did. Long story short, it was. All that evidence got thrown out. And my attorney came to me and said, Jimmy, you need to think about taking a plea. He said, the jury's not going to hear any of this, and you're facing 15 years. And Rick Warren said a prayer over me in January of 2010. It said, let the jury be just, let them see through the smoke and mirrors, but most of all, give Jimmy the strength to see it to the end. And when my attorney asked me that, I said, I got it on better authority that I'm supposed to see this to the end.
Oofa.
And sure enough, thank God Court TV covered the trial. It was the public actually saw everything unfold and get the truth and everything that happened, even though all that evidence was, she was in an accident 6 months prior, a DUI accident. And that we weren't even allowed to use that as proof of why this accident could have happened. A crooked DA, a cop that was lying about things, and but I had to wait for my day in court. And sure enough, like I said, after 3 years, we were able to prove everything, and again, without all of the evidence, it's just crazy how the system works. But again, the strength that I learned through that, by putting my faith that said, hey, I'm going to trust in God here, and it did work out. And I'm grateful for that. And as soon as the trial was over, the judge called me in the office and said, Mr. Leyritz, this should have never happened. You should have never went to trial. Unfortunately, because of the woman passing, it was kind of an important case, but the state attorney abused her powers, but you live in her neighborhood. You need to get out of there. Where do you want to go? Because I got a DUI, first time offense. That was what I got. I could have fought that because we were able to prove at the time of the accident that my blood alcohol level was below a 0.08 and that it was actually even below a 0.04. But because they got my blood 2 hours later, it was above because I had a shot and a drink right before I left the bar, but that was not in my system at the time. And long story short, we could have fought it, and I just said to my attorney, nope, I'm taking the DUI. I was guilty of drinking and driving. That's what I did. I need to take my penance too, And I said, I can live with that. And so we took that, and the judge called me and said, normally I don't let people leave the state of Florida, but in your situation, you need to get out of that neighborhood. And so I said, well, can I go to California? And he's like, go. And so I took the 3 boys in 2011, and we went out to California, and we've been out there ever since. My wife, who met me, and I told you guys a story earlier about how we met because of the purpose-driven life, because she went to Saddleback Church, and that we again in Catching Heat, you can get that story, but just all the things that have happened since then. And now where my life is now, I'm in your business. I'm in the real estate business. I do title insurance. It's not a good time for us right now. It's tough. The feds came out in January and said we're going to have 4 cuts this year before the end of the year. Well, we're in June, and all of a sudden now it's we're going to have one in September. But you know what's going to happen. Oh, the election's in November, so we're just going to hold off and wait to see what happens. Yeah. So, but during COVID and right after COVID, we were printing money. I mean, I was doing 50 to 100 refis a month.
Yeah, how many are you doing now?
If I get one a month right now, I'm lucky. You know. And so I always tell people, I'm going to be speaking later at Keller Williams' little event and to some of the salespeople there, and I just say to them, just stay the course. Believe that what you're doing, your inventory is going to get better as the hopefully the interest rates come down after November. But right now you have to learn to be a little bit more creative. You have to look at somebody and say, hey, you know what? I think you should buy this house because in 4 years from now you'll probably be able to refi. And you know what? You'll be able to, but you got the house of your dream right now. And yes, you're paying it at a higher interest and everything else, but you got the house.
Exactly. So you don't buy the house. You pay rent for the next 4 years. You have 0 tax write-offs, blah, 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 blah. You play the whole game and play it out in 4 years, and look where you would be.
Yeah.
I got a question for you, man. So, because you're mentioning, faith. And then you had said, so Bill and I are both men of faith, right? So you said that you had an answer from a higher power on what you should do in the case. So let me ask you a really honest question, right? Where would you be faith-wise if you lost that case? How do you think Jimmy Leyritz would have responded to God in that moment?
I would, at that particular time where I'm at in my life now, I trust in God now. Whatever happens, there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
You know, I missed my flight. Damn, why did I miss that? Well, there's a reason I missed that flight. You know, I don't know what I would have done because I never thought of that. I never once, just like with my big league career, I'm making it to the major leagues. I could care less what anybody else says. I'm getting to the major leagues. I got there. For me, the trial was, okay, just get me to the courtroom because I'm going to beat this woman to the death. You know, we had the incident before with the domestic violence thing with my ex-wife, where we got in front of the judge for my bond hearing because if I had really committed domestic violence, I would have gone to jail and sat in jail to my trial, and we were able to prove that my ex-wife was lying and that she almost went to jail for false charges. But during that time, the state attorney was prosecuting me for my ex-wife during this little trial, and I abused her so badly because she didn't have the information. She didn't know my ex-wife had major drug issues. She didn't know my ex-wife was considered bipolar 2 disorder and all these other things that she didn't know. And I told my attorney, I can't wait till she starts asking me questions because I'm prepared and I am going to abuse this woman.
Right back to preparation.
Yeah, preparation.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just it. And that's like in our fields, in our real, you got to figure it out. You know what? If you're a real estate agent right now, you got to be looking at going, okay, tough market, tough times. The only people that are going to sell their houses right now are people that are actually leaving the state. So I want to go look at maybe a demographic of all these kids graduating high school and these people having no more kids because they're the first ones that are going to move to New York South and Florida. Right? I call Florida
South.
New York South. Right? Because now all of a sudden you're an empty nester and you don't need this big house that your kids were. I mean, my wife and I, we just did this in California. We had 5 kids together. We lived in the country club in a big house, 5 bedrooms. You know, every kid had their own room. You know, we or actually 6 bedrooms. We had, you know, and so we lived that lifestyle for a while. And then all of a sudden, all the kids are out now. They're all in college, you know, doing their things. And so now it's like, okay, what do we do? And we downsized and we moved to the beach. But we're still paying a little bit more than we should be because we didn't leave the state.
Right.
But all of my friends who left the state sold further at the height, right? They're moved to Nashville and now they're living like millionaires.
Oh, you ain't kidding.
You know, and it's like, you know, if you're selling houses, if you're waiting for inventory, those are the kind of people that you have to kind of target is like, who's going to be moving out? You know, find the demographic of, you know, and then also you got to figure out who's moving in.
Of course.
You know, but I think that the moving out is the bigger one because now you know that they're not trying to buy again in New York or in the area because that's kind of a stupid thing, especially if you have a 2.8 or 3.1
that's the problem.
interest rate.
Why sell?
Why sell?
Yeah.
You know, the only way you're selling is if you are leaving and you're not staying here.
Right.
And that's the kind of people that if you're trying to be an agent, that's what you have to look for. Those type of people that are leaving the state.
Listen, there's that, and then to stay in this toll here of business, there's life events that will always happen. Always, every single day. People are going to get married. People are going to get divorced. People are going to have kids. Graduations are going to happen. We're going to hit retirement. These things are going to happen every single day. So it comes back down to, so I love the way you answered my question about the faith. You brought it right back to the mindset. It's not going to happen. I believe in it wholeheartedly, and I'm going to make my way through that. We take the same exact approach in this business. I'm going to tell you one of the best reasons why. One of my father-in-law's best friends is an attorney. He's also a real estate investor, owns a boatload of real estate. And in the beginning of my career, young, dumb, no clue what's going on. I didn't, right? I come from a blue-collar family, so when I got into sales, I'm like, I'm just figuring this thing out. And he pulled me aside. He goes, Ronnie, let me tell you something. He goes, and at the time, he had done thousands of real estate closings as an attorney. He said the best realtors that I've been with in this business have made more money in a down market. And something clicked with me. And I said, okay, now that's got to be mindset. How could it not be?
Yeah.
If it's a down market, and me and Bill pretty much had come in right near the crash of '08,
Okay.
and all we did was go up from there. We never, ever, ever looked back. We never,
Right.
turned around, did less. And that was mindset. And so that's why I say it. Like, okay, I could look for the demographic because that's going to be the bigger pool. I'm also going to have to recognize right here, they're moving.
Yeah.
Someone's moving, right? So let's go find them. Let's not sink down. Let's not sit on a bench with my jacket on because I'm not in the lineup
Right.
today.
Right.
It's the same thing, man.
Yeah, like I said, one thing that I just literally committed less than a month ago, was to do title full time, because I was doing so many different things. I was working for a baseball agency. I was doing, I was working for different types of companies, and I wasn't concentrating on one thing. And my wife grabbed me probably 2 months ago and said, "You are so good when you put your mind to one thing. Mm-hmm. I think you should do title full time, and you'll kill it." And so that is now I've just pivoted again, and now I'm doing title full time. I work for a company called Kensington Vanguard here in New York.
Okay.
And I'm excited because I am going to put my mind to it and concentrate just on one thing for the first time in probably 10 years.
Yeah.
That I think, I've been successful doing the other things, but not at the level that I could have been because I was doing too many things.
Yeah. Have you ever read Gary Keller's book, The One Thing?
Yeah.
Awesome, right?
Yeah. I've been so blessed and so lucky with people in my life. And again, most of it's because I was a New York Yankee. But, in 2013, a company called First Equity had a group called Pink Tie. I was a spokesperson for the company. And they raised money for all different charities and foundations that needed financial help. And I started working for them, and they were a title company. And they said, "Oh, well, if you want to sell title, we'll give you 50% of everything you bring in." And I'm like, I went to school for 3.5 years for sales and marketing. Okay, I could probably do this. And so the first time they had a meeting with
Mom was right, by the way.
well, exactly. So they had 200 salespeople come in and different mortgage people and everything else come in, and I was at this event as the pink tie guy, but I was talking about title to these people, and they're listening to me, and they're like, "How do you know this stuff?" I go, "Dude, it's called Google." I learned enough just to be a little bit dangerous, but not. I really don't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And they're like, "Okay, we want to hire you." So I ended up working for those guys. It was great because number one, it got my name back as far as doing charitable things, working for all the different charities and things like that, but then also being able to start making some money. I worked for them for about 6 years, 7 years till COVID hit. And then they didn't need a spokesperson anymore. And then I transferred over to a company called AmTrust with a really close friend of mine, Steve Napolitano. And I worked there for a couple of years. And then just recently I've decided to go over to Kensington Vanguard and give it full time.
Beautiful.
And I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be, like I said, it's another challenge. But for me, again, I have the connections. I know the people. I have the clientele. Listen, I still work for the Yankees, and I do suite appearances, and I go up there in the suites. I'm with the top 3% in New York. And the first thing everybody always asks is, "Hey, what are you doing nowadays?" I go, "Well, I'm doing..."
What do you ask?
Yeah, I go, "I'm doing title." Oh, I'm in real estate. Let's get together. Jim Leyritz will be my agent. I'm like, "Well, yeah, again, I'm your agent, but my team is what I'm going to rely on."
Beautiful.
And I probably have the best team behind me now with Kensington Vanguard. So it's just an interesting, for me, it's another new step, but it's a challenge. And that's one thing like my father always taught me was get a challenge and put your mind to it, and you'll conquer it, because he knows my mindset. He knows that I won't go until I make sure I do the best that I could possibly do and be prepared, be ready, but also to be able to adjust. Because this market goes this way, this market goes that way. When it's down, it's down. How do you do this? How do you get through that? Those are the things, again, I thank God for my baseball career. Because, number one, playing in New York,
oh, my goodness.
I learned to ignore the media, which really helped me during my trial because they had me convicted from day one, right? I played for George Steinbrenner, who demanded the best. And never once did I ever say, okay, I'm not going to try to be the best, because I know what George was wanting. And so all these different things that I learned through baseball, I've been able to take over to the business side and be able to really be somewhat successful doing it. Because at the end of the day, when I go into it, like I told you before, when I go into a meeting, the guy could care less if I hit home runs for the New York Yankees. It's like, what are you selling? Is your product good? Is your service good? If it's not, I don't care, Jimmy. You're a nice guy, but I'm not doing business with you.
Right.
And that's why for me, I've had to vet out different companies and different things and make sure that I had the right people for the business that I was wanting to go into or start. First it was residential, and then it became commercial, and now I'm kind of doing a mixture of both. And it's good because right now the residential market's tough, but the commercial market's still doing pretty good.
Okay.
And so you got a lot of office buildings now going into multifamilies. So
conversions and all.
Yeah, all these conversions that are going on. So that's going to help on the commercial side. So
are you just in New York or?
No, I'm everywhere. So I live in California.
Right.
And I do work in California. I have clients there. I have clients here in New York, and Kensington Vanguard's national.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So it gives me the ability to do just about, we do a lot in Florida, a lot in Texas. I love Texas because that's the biggest commission that you can possibly get from any of these deals.
Is it really?
Oh yeah.
How come?
Because Texas, everything's big in Texas.
I was gonna say it, man. You beat me to it. Come on, I had it set right here.
It's funny because people I always tell people because I'm always thinking that outside the box and thinking that things, and I just trying to figure out how I can create things and create some things to happen. And one guy asked me one day, he said, "How do why do you do that?" I go, "Because the best motion's promotion. That's all. You got to make sure that you cannot just sit back and expect things to come to you. There was a while there that before I had the accident, I could have done that the rest of my life. I could have been the king of New York. I never had to pay for food. I never had to do for things. I was making almost $1 million doing TV and radio at the time of the accident. I was just getting ready to sign a huge deal with Fox. God said, okay, now I'm going to put you in a different direction. And then I met my wife. So for me, it's just a matter of being able to pivot and being able to change, but also relying on my faith, relying on that everything happens for a reason. Don't question it. Just learn if you're fired from a job or if you lose a job, or if you lose a client or you lose something else, figure out how you're going to pick up the next one.
Yep.
They always say, again, I don't like to get too religious because some people don't like religion. I just tell people you need a higher power because you ain't strong enough yourself.
Sure.
And whether your higher power is God, whether your higher power is science, whatever you want to do, you just need that extra higher power and just rely on it because it is going to get you through because you can't do it yourself.
No.
So
We're human.
Yeah.
Hey, so you mentioned faith. Got just a couple minutes here, legit, maybe even 1 minute. So I looked up a couple of things. You mentioned charitable events. Are you still involved with FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes?
Yeah.
What do you do with them?
So basically, there's a guy in California that calls me up once in a while and says, "Hey, can you come speak with the baseball team?"
Okay.
We have a bunch of Christian kids that they have Christian groups.
Yes.
To athletes. So I'll go speak to the athletes about number one, all the success I had, all the home runs I hit in the playoffs and World Series, but also what I went through. And being knocked off that perch and and how living in faith has helped me.
Awesome, man.
And
I've been to a bunch of FCA events. I love them. I think the people are it's an amazing organization.
I do
man.
a ton with ALS because my brother-in-law passed away in 2010 from ALS.
Oh my goodness!
And of course, being a Yankee and Lou Gehrig, I mean that was
there it is.
But it was amazing because I was already involved with ALS when my brother-in-law contracted it, and. The guy that I was involved with, a guy named Chris Pendergrass here, he was the poster boy for ALS because he did so much research. He was the one that really got the ball rolling. He lived with it for 27 years. He started the Relay for Life, which is a bunch of people in their wheelchairs that they do this ALS walk. But he was there, and he passed away, I think, 2 years ago. And his wife and I are still very close. But what they did when my brother-in-law and my sister were dealing with it, to help them understand what they were going to be facing. Christine reached out to my sister and said, this is what you're going to go through. This is what, and my brother-in-law made a choice that he did not want to live just in a wheelchair his rest of his life. So he literally was on stage with Kiss 2 weeks before he passed away. And that's a whole other story. But yeah, so I do a lot of that stuff at ALS. Of course, 9/11. I've been doing the Cantor Fitzgerald Charity Day for the last 16 years. Yep. I just started 2 years ago getting more involved with Tunnel for Towers because Frank Sillers is just unbelievable what he does for our veterans and what he does with that organization. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm so excited to be part of that and really get going with that. And it's New York,
Right.
it's New York, and we're one of the greatest cities in the world. Me and my wife always said, when my last child started college 2 years ago, my wife said, okay, you're gonna have to pay for this college, number one. She said, but you need to go back to New York and you need to start working again. Because what happened was when I had the accident, I did not want the boys. I could have come back to New York and got my name back right away and gone, but my boys would have been dealing with just what Strawberry's kids and Steve Howe's kids dealt with. Oh, your father was a drug, all these stuff. And it would not have been a safe place for them.
Right.
So that's when I chose to go to California, and I made a commitment with my wife, and she made a commitment to me that we were going to raise these kids until they were healthy and living a good life, and then we could worry about ourselves. And so 2 years ago, she said, "Okay, all your boys are out; they're all doing their thing. My girls are going to college, and let's get your life back."
What a legacy,
Yeah.
man.
So,
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So it's been quite a journey, and the journey's still going. But it's one of those things that every day living by faith. My wife and I wake up in the morning. She goes to her room. She does 20 minutes of Bible study. I do 20 minutes of Bible study before we even speak to each other. And it has made our marriage so great that by the time we get to each other, we're like, okay, we're already in the Word.
Awesome.
And we're able to deal with things so much easier because of our faith and of our trust. And it's just, I'm blessed to be able to have a wife like that. That's a believer like I am, and it just makes things. And our kids are able to see it, and it rubs off on them. And I know right now, not every one of them believes, but I know if they ever hit a bad patch in their life, that they know where to turn to.
Right.
And that's what we try to teach our kids. It's like, okay, you know what? You're not going to go to church every Sunday with us. We know that. You're going to college. You're doing your thing. Mm-hmm. But here's the situation: if you ever get into a rut and you feel lost, you know where to turn, and that's important. And that's
Amen.
important. Yeah.
Definitely, man.
So.
Jimmy, listen, we want to say thank you.
No.
We might have gone a little over time, so we apologize. We're going to see you at the.
You got Rich calling me. That means we're over time.
Oh, yeah. We definitely know we got to do it. So thank you for being here. We greatly appreciate it. Everybody out there, we thank you for watching. You can check us out on anywhere you find your podcast. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, this, that, the other thing. And we want to say thank you. If you like the content, click the subscribe button. We greatly appreciate it. That's going to help us bring more great people on like Jimmy Leyritz.
And you need to send me all this tape because I'll put it out on my social media, which
will
is,
definitely
of course,
do that,
the
man.
real Jay Leyritz on Instagram and Twitter, and then, of course, the website, JimLeyritz.com.
JimLeyritz.com. Jimmy, thank you, man.
Jimmy,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you so much.
Thank you.